this is the week that we celebrate, right? Like this week is a celebration week. We celebrate family and friends, and we celebrate gifts and dinners and all the other things that go into Christmas. And at the same time, and most importantly, we celebrate redemption in the form of Jesus coming to earth while retaining all of his godliness and yet becoming 100% man. This week we celebrate the why behind all of this, and more importantly, what it means for you and what it means for me. We're finishing up this collection of messages that we started a few weeks ago called Finding Home. And I don't know if you've been here for all of it. Maybe this is your first time. I promise you're not going to be lost on this. But we're wrapping this series up. And the idea behind Finding Home is that we come and we're built in with this sense of home. That God created us with a sense of home that we want to be a part of. And on a broader scale, that there was this grander thing that was birthed 2,000 years ago that we belong to. We're talking about finding home because 2,000 years ago, God created this bridge from us to home, where we're supposed to be, who we're supposed to be with. We belong in this. We belong here. I want to take today from a little bit of a different angle than maybe we would normally do on our Christmas service. I don't necessarily want to talk about the perspective of Mary or the shepherds today. I want to go at it from God's perspective. To look at this story as God looked at this story. And it's a unique perspective because we don't necessarily know how God thinks. We can't logic the way that God thinks. In fact, in our finite human selves, we can't actually figure out how God thinks. And yet God gave us scripture that gives us just a little more insight into how he thinks, into how he looks. We can assume how Mary thinks. We can assume how the shepherds think. We can assume what Joseph is thinking when he finds out he's going to be a dad and yet he's not even married to Mary yet. You know, we can assume these feelings, but we don't know what God thinks. But we look at scripture and we can see it. In John chapter 1, it says this. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning." Who was with God? The Word was with God. Who is the Word? We're a little unsettled on that one. I'm going to let you give me the answer on that one. "Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it." Let me read it again because I want you to get it because this is good. Like, this is really, really good. Okay, you ready? "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it." Not quite the Christmas story that you would expect, right? If you know me at all, I love to talk about perspective. If you've been in service before, I talk about perspective a lot. God's perspective is so much bigger than our perspective. So for us to assume that the Christmas story begins in the manger would be silly, because God has this bigger picture in mind all of the time. In Scripture, there are 4 books of the Bible that outline the physical life of Jesus: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the 4 Gospels. Matthew came from a Jewish perspective. Luke came from a non-Jewish perspective. Mark came from Peter's perspective, who is most likely his source in writing his book. And then you find John, who comes with this bigger picture perspective. He focuses so much more on why Jesus did what Jesus did, and he leaves the details to the other guys. John doesn't outline a baby being born. Instead, he says, "The Word became flesh and it dwelt among us." It wasn't a baby in a manger, it was the Word became flesh. That the Word that was there at the beginning of time, that is the light to all men, became flesh and came face to face with us. In the original Greek, that term word is translated 2 ways. It's translated rhema, and it's translated to logos. Both have very, very different meanings. Rhema usually means the spoken word. For instance, when the angels came to Mary and said that you would give birth to a son and the son would be the savior of the world, the word that is used is rhema. That term in John chapter 1 is implied a total message, and it's translated into logos. And it's usually reference to God's message to mankind. That there is this completeness. The word logos is a complete message. And so in John chapter 1, when the word became flesh, the term used, or the word in Greek used, is logos, which is the complete message, that God chose completeness to come to earth and become flesh. The message is complete. Does that make sense? John doesn't detail the story. He gets much bigger and identifies God's message to mankind. What is God's message to mankind? It's Jesus. It's redemption. The Word, Jesus, came and became flesh. Here's what the message did for us. Here's what Logos did for us. It dealt with darkness and it dealt with evil in a way that we cannot do by ourselves. It dealt with darkness in a way that we don't have the ability to deal with ourselves. The Word became flesh. This thing that we celebrate on Christmas was Jesus coming to humanity and bringing correction and redemption to redeem mankind. It's heavy, right? It's heavy. It's probably heavier than we would normally say on a Christmas Sunday, right? Come Tuesday, I promise I'll be lighter. But we needed the message. We needed Logos. We needed this complete thing, God's message to mankind. We need it because we don't have the ability to fight darkness ourselves. Because in Genesis, when sin enters the world, all of a sudden it builds this separation between us and home. It builds this separation between us and God. And we could not get to God without Jesus coming and building the bridge for us. Sin created in our world, in our lives, these dark things that we can't handle by ourselves. For instance, first fill in your blank. It brought delays. Sin brought delays into the world, delays that prevent us from getting here to home, here to God. Delays are tough because delays are slow burns, right? Nobody ever starts out a situation feeling let down, right? We go into things and we're excited, and then delay happens and it sucks the life out of everything. I read this story this week, or this post on the internet. This girl had taken screenshots of this text thread that she was having with her dad. And maybe you saw it. It's a very great story. And you're going to get weepy here in a minute. And just wait. If you're not ready, get ready. So this girl, she screenshots this text thread with her dad. And her dad was texting her because he was about to go out on a first date, right? We don't know what happened to the mom. She's not in the picture. And I'm assuming. And so he's about to go on this first date, and he's taking these mirror selfie pictures of himself. And he's sending them to his daughter with different outfits on. And he's trying to get his daughter to help him pick an outfit for his first date. Right? It's super sweet. Are you weepy yet? They're going to get weepy here in a minute. So the daughter posts this, and the internet went to work, right? Like, the internet loves stories like this. I don't know why the internet never takes up for my stories, but sometimes my stories are good. My keychain broke yesterday, and I posted all about it. Yeah, I was weepy. So she posts this thing and the internet takes a hold of it, right? And this local restaurant replies back to this girl's photos of her text thread. And this restaurant writes her back and says, have them come in, dinner's on us, right? Like, that's what the internet can accomplish, right? Free dinner. And so, some time goes by and the girl gets back on Twitter and she replies back to the restaurant and says, they totally would have come in, but my dad got stood up. And, right, now we're getting weepy. I got a little flushed just now. And the internet lost their minds. And I say that the internet is essentially one person, right? Like, we move as one being. And the internet lost their mind. And no dad has ever been taken up for more than in this situation. And like to the point where this dad's probably on the new season of The Bachelor. Like Like the internet took up for this guy because he got stood up. It was a wonderful story. I'm assuming. I don't know what happened at the end. But he's married now, 3 new children. Yeah, the daughter that posted it, she's on the outs. We don't ever start these stories with letdown, right? Like this story didn't start with the dad getting stood up. The story started with the dad being excited about his outfit for a first date. And then this process or this time goes by, and in that process, something happens and it sucks the life out of the situation. The Christmas story is built on a delay. This story was built on a delay. For generations, there was a handful of Jewish people that lived their lives every single day waiting in anticipation for the arrival of this coming Messiah, this prophesied Messiah. Every single day. But unlike the story we know, unlike the way that we know it unfolds, nothing was happening for these people, generation after generation. I can't imagine living my life waiting for this thing that was prophesied over me, this coming Messiah that would come to die on a cross and redeem mankind, and it just isn't happening. Delays are this slow burn where we start out excited and something over the course of time happens, and we usually finish not super excited. And it leads to the second thing, which is disappointments. We have disappointments in our life. Someone asked me the other day, how do I deal with Christmas? They said, do the holidays trigger your emotions? And I was like, no, I'm always this emotional. And then he laughed and I cried. Sometimes we approach this season with hope for something better. Right? Like we go into holidays and for whatever reasons, whatever situations are built into our life, we're disappointed in the holiday season. And so we go into the holidays hoping that maybe this year is going to be better than last year. Maybe this is going to be better than my childhood. Maybe this is the year that the relationship is revived. That the bond between my kids is rekindled. We see everyone else doing things a certain way and we think to ourselves, that's how it should be. That's how it could be if things were better for me. And we live our lives with these black clouds hanging over us. Those disappointments lead to the third thing, which is doubt. This is a hard season for us to wrap our heads around. Even scripturally, we look at this and I don't think that we are capable of fully understanding what's happening in this story. That an angel comes to Mary and says, you're going to give birth, Virgin Mary, to a child, and that child is going to save the world. I don't think that we can wrap our heads around that. That sounds like a straight to DVD kind of movie, right? Like that this virgin is going to give birth to a child. Sounds make-believe. And even as believers, we have faith that this is what it is and that God did this and we can believe it, but I don't think we can ever actually wrap our heads around it. This is a hard season to wrap our heads around. And so doubt almost seems like the anthem of Christmas, or it can. Our disappointments lead us to things that maybe we don't have hope for, to cause us to doubt in our hope. But let me tell you this, every unbeliever has faith and every believer has doubts. Every single unbeliever has faith in something. Everyone relies on commitments and foundations that we cannot see or prove. That's faith. Faith doesn't necessarily have to be in God. All of us have things that we believe in, even outside the spectrum of God. Faith is required in love. Faith is required in goodness. Faith is required in beauty. Faith is required in logic and rationality. We can't see these things. The list goes on and things that we have faith in. At the same time, every believer has doubts. It's part of being human. It's part of our human nature. It doesn't mean that we should doubt. It just means that it's a part of this life that we are a part of. The key is to figure out where we land on our doubts. The cool thing about it is that God isn't scared. God is not timid. God is not intimidated. God is not nervous about our doubts. Our doubts don't rattle God. I think he just waits for us to realize that faith will always trump our doubts. The truth is, for most of us, we're constantly in the process of figuring out our doubts. We're in a process of trying to figure out where we land on this, and this. Maybe it's small things. Maybe it's big things. Maybe you doubt your marriage. Maybe you doubt relationships or friendships. Maybe you're at this point in your life and you doubt the existence of God. I don't think that God is rattled or afraid of our doubt that God exists. That there are unbelievers, people that say, I don't know about this God thing. I don't think God is sitting in his chair thinking like, oh man, I hope they start. I think that God is like, no, I know what's real. And I know what these people can come to. And I know the faith and the understanding that they can have. My hope is that we begin to understand that we have permission to doubt. It's okay to doubt things. If you were here last week, we talked about Thomas. Jesus comes to Thomas at the end of kind of his physical story, and he comes to a very doubtful Thomas. And he tells Thomas, you see me now, and so you believe, but blessed are those that don't see and they believe. And the thing is, I think that we read stories like that and we see this interaction with Jesus and Thomas and we think, man, I don't always see Jesus and yet I believe, so I am blessed. And that's kind of where we hang our hat, and we forget the fact that Jesus doesn't condemn Thomas in this moment for doubting. Thomas has these doubts and Jesus doesn't condemn him. He simply uses it as this teachable moment. Delays and disappointments and doubts are the things that get in the way of us belonging. The thing that says, I belong here. The thing that says that home was built for me. Here's the thing, the Christmas story is this representation and this indication of the thing that God did and is doing to counter those things in our life. And those are three examples. We have all of these dark elements that are constantly built into our life, but the Christmas story is this indication that God is bigger and better than the things that get in the way of us belonging to what he did for us. This is more than a story of an angel coming to a girl to tell of a birth. It's more than a story of angels going to shepherds. It's this bigger thing, this prophesied thing, hundreds of years before Jesus came into existence. And I think that through it, there are some things that Jesus wants to do for us if we choose to allow him to do it. I think that we look at this story, and again, the story doesn't change, and yet the message reads differently every time that we read it. And I think that if we would begin to allow God to speak things into our life, God will provide us with things that we can't do by ourselves, that we can't understand by ourselves. I have 4 quick thoughts. The first one is this. Jesus comes, the Christmas story, and he wants to give us spiritual insight. Spiritual insight anchors our lives. I heard a prayer that said this. It said, God, grant me the serenity to accept the gifts I cannot return, the courage to regift the ones I can, and the receipts to know the difference. Insight is everything, right? The way that we view things is everything. The understanding that we have of things is everything. Isaiah, who wrote about Jesus hundreds of years before Jesus was born, says this of insight. He says, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. Isaiah talks about this deep darkness and how it becomes clear that there is a change that needs to occur. There's a change that needs to occur as a result of the darkness, and yet these people are seeing this great light. And it's still in the darkness, in the midst of the darkness. God doesn't stay detached. God doesn't stay uninvolved. God doesn't let us simply walk through the darkness. He takes initiative to show us out of the darkness. God takes the initiative to walk us out of the darkness. And the darkness is there, and the darkness doesn't change. What I love about Isaiah is he doesn't try and rationalize away the darkness. He doesn't explain away the darkness. He simply says that there's a light that will trump the darkness. Here's what that type of insight does for us. It tells us that we belong in this. That type of insight into this story tells us that I'm worth so much more than my problems. That type of insight tells me that the chaos that I think is around me is not really chaos, and it will pass. The darkness prevents us from seeing what the light identifies for us. The question is, are we willing to go after what the light can identify? Are we willing to allow the light to illuminate what's happening in the darkness? It's like when we're kids and we're laying in bed and we see monsters on the wall. Is it a monster, or is it really our underpants hanging on the end of a bat flapping in the wind because our window is open? You know what I'm saying? And then we flip the lights on and we realize that it's not a monster, and the light will always trump the darkness. In my darkness, I would imagine that God only calls qualified people, and yet God calls Mary, and he calls shepherds, and he calls Joseph. He brings them into his narrative. In my darkness, I would imagine that God watches me from a distance in judgment because of what I've become or who I've become. In darkness, my insight and my perspective on things is completely wrong. And yet in Jesus, we see Jesus hanging out with Matthew, who's a tax collector, who's notorious for being on the wrong side of good. We see Jesus taking up for the woman caught in adultery. We see Jesus hanging out with a woman at the well, who is a Samaritan, who was on the outside, who was rejected, who was hated. And yet Jesus provides for her something that she could not provide for herself in salvation. See, his entire persona and mission embodied insight. Insight that says, you don't do the work for you, I do the work for you. I do the work for you. I fight the battle for you. I illuminate the darkness for you. Here's the second thing. You still with me? He allows us to change our less than lifestyle. We talk about belonging, and unfortunately so many times, so much of our lives are lived in this less than belonging kind of lifestyle. But the belonging was built for us. Over and over in this story, it says for us. It was created for us. Jesus' mission was to bring us into the fold, that our lives were meant to be lived in the fold. And it's not exclusive, it's incredibly inclusive. God will take any of us because the narrative was built for us. For the world 2,000 years ago, the cross was this incredible loss. That you have this man that walked around for 3 years. He had 3 years in his life to do ministry. That he taught and he encouraged and he healed and he performed miracles for 3 years. In the blink of an eye, it was over. And he's dead. 2,000 years ago, the cross felt like a loss. God's heart hurt. But it didn't stop there. The cross was a win for us because it brought salvation and it brought forgiveness and it brought grace and it brought mercy. That's why John 10:10 says the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. The thief is coming to take, but I came. Jesus came so that we can have life. The win is for us. The victory is for us. The success is for us. Maybe you feel stuck. Jesus came to a world that was very, very stuck. He settled the dust and he settled the chaos. Maybe you feel stuck. Jesus is coming to settle the dust and settle the chaos. Here's the third thing. He came to bring ultimate justice. So much of our life is saturated in us feeling like the injustice is personal. That there is this attack on us that we don't have the ability to fix. There's this wrong done to us and there's nothing that we can do to make it right. There's something that's been said about us or said to us that we don't have the ability to correct. Isaiah goes on and he says, For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. The first part of that verse is looking back at this pivotal moment in Israel's history where they lived these 400 years in captivity, and Moses comes in and sets them free in their physical state. And Isaiah is referencing this moment because Jesus is coming to set us free in our spiritual state. He's correlating the two events. One is physical, one is spiritual. Freedom from sin and guilt and shame and condemnation. The second part of that verse talks about power. It's referencing Gideon. The story of Gideon is incredible. Gideon was weak. He didn't have courage, but God provided him courage, and God was incredibly patient with Gideon. He's going to fight the Midianites, and God whittles this army down to 300 men. And yet the Midianites have thousands. And Gideon is panicking. And God goes in and does his God thing, and the 300 men have victory over the thousands. God fights the battle for them. When we receive Jesus, God fights the battle for us. When we do things with God, we have victory because God has said, with me, I'll give you victory. One of the things I love about Isaiah, I said it earlier, is that he doesn't try and explain away the darkness. He doesn't say that it's not there. He doesn't say that it's not a big deal. We walk through things. We go through things. We go through dark, trying times. And I don't know what you're going through, whether big or small. But he simply says that there is this light that outshines the darkness that we face. That's God's way of defeating and conquering injustice. All this leading up and building up to God bringing this massive hope to the world called Jesus. Isaiah knew of this upcoming redemption and its ability to defeat injustice. Here's the fourth thing, and I'll close with this. Jesus came to offer something that we could not provide for ourselves. I love that. I love that. Jesus came to offer something that we could not offer ourselves. We cannot bring it to ourselves. We cannot grab a hold of it by ourselves. He goes on and he says, he will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. If we were going to peel ourselves away from all of the things of Christmas, if we have our Wednesday and Tuesday events, but just for a moment we were to separate ourselves from the things of this week. It's not about the presents, it's not about the gifts, it's not about any of that stuff in this moment. And maybe we even separate ourselves from what happens in the manger, what happens with Mary and the original Christmas story. We separate ourselves from that. What would I only dare to hope that God could accomplish for my life? Not the small things, but the really, really big things for my life. Not for everyone else, but what could God accomplish? What could God do for my life? What would I hope that Jesus could accomplish for me? Because the very baseline of this thing is enormous. Right up front, the story starts with salvation. What could I hope based on the grounds that God provided salvation first for me? That the basis of all of this, the foundation of what we stand on, is salvation. This relationship, this bond with God. Springboarding off of that, what could I hope God could do for my life? Right up front, he provides something in salvation that we could not do for ourselves. I don't have the physical ability. I don't have the spiritual intellect. I don't have the purity to do what Christ did for me. Here's the thing. You don't have the physical ability. You don't have the spiritual intellect. And you don't have the purity to do what Christ did for you. The Christmas story, whether you start in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Isaiah, or Genesis, it gives us hope that we were created for this belonging. It gives us hope for this home that we have, that God created this thing for us, and it's not exclusive, it's inclusive. This narrative that he has called us to be a part of, and it's free of charge. There are no strings attached. He simply says, I have built this for you. I have called you to be a part of this narrative. Will we be a part of this narrative? Come on, I pray with you. Jesus, thank you so much.